I had recordings after 9/11. We made numerous recordings with Durso about Chin's role in the family, still running things from prison. And I said, let's go see what Chin's doing after 9/11. And he's on the phone talking to the family like I'm talking to you now. And he was the one that called them to say, is everybody okay? Because he's in prison in Texas and he wants to see what the airplane's down. And the family didn't even know that the planes hit the World Trade Center. So it was clear that he was faking it. It's hypocritical. Your crime family's supposed to come before your blood family. It's really a bizarre thought when you think about that. And I cite some of the details and experiences in the life in recordings. The whole thing about whacking somebody that was your best man and you're going to kill him because the family wants you to kill him all over a title. That type of thing just doesn't resonate with me. And so expressing that to people when you're talking about the life, the people who really understand it and are a stronger personality, I think, can cooperate, either on the level of an informant or a cooperating witness.
Hey everyone, welcome to another Sit Down with Michael Franzese. Hope everybody is doing well. All is good. Very blessed on this end. As always, my friends, I give all the praise, honor, glory, and thanksgiving to our God for that because he certainly deserves it. Very interesting guest today. His name is Mike Campi. He is a retired FBI agent. He worked in New York. He was in the organized crime division. He worked specifically on the Genovese family. Everybody is familiar with that, I'm sure, by now. And very interesting for me to sit down and have a conversation with a former FBI agent. He was a little bit after my time. He worked more in the 90s. I was already in prison by that time. But he wrote a great book, and it's called Mafia Takedown. And it's all about his takedown of many of the principal members of the Genovese family, including the Chin and a few others. I know you're familiar with many of these names. It's very interesting for me to sit down with somebody that has so much information about my former life and my former associates. I got to tell you something. Nothing is unknown any longer. Between all their investigative techniques and informants and everything else, they know everything about the life. It's unbelievable the way it turned out. But it's going to be satisfying for me to talk to him just to see what he knows. It's always interesting. I had a great conversation with Rudy Giuliani, former U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, who prosecuted me, was the mayor of New York. We had a great conversation. We've come full circle. And to speak to an FBI agent, it's like coming full circle for me also. So going to enjoy this. I hope all of you do. He's a very polished guy and very knowledgeable. So I think it's going to be a great talk. So we'll see what happens. No further delay. Former FBI agent Mike Campi.
I breezed through the book, a lot of interesting things that we're going to talk about, some things that even I didn't know about and that I want to get into, some of the highlights of the book. But I will say this, have you ever been interviewed by a former made man before?
No. Oh, wait a second. I've interviewed, but I haven't been interviewed. Not that I can recall, no.
So this is the first time the shoe is really on the other foot.
Yeah. We have, I got transferred from my first office as a new agent to C5. Stanley Nye, Dave Stone, that whole thing was I came to that squad and I assigned to an investigation regarding Basil Cervone, the local 13 guy. So a lot was going on there at the time.
Well,
Stanley Nye was a different type of guy.
I could imagine. A couple of weeks ago, I sat down with Rudy Giuliani. And
I saw that.
Yeah, that was an experience, but it was a good one. I mean, I enjoyed it very much. And, it's great to come full circle, kind of, Mike.
Yeah.
It really is. It's a good feeling for me. But
Yeah.
anyway, listen, terrific book. I wouldn't have liked the title 30 years ago, but today it's
Yeah, I could understand. Yeah. Well, again, part of the book, primary interest in the book is to try to, magnify what the life is like, because it's after you're in it, that's where it becomes problematic because it's not your decision to leave.
It's funny that you say that because, at least from my perspective, growing up with my dad and seeing the life from the outside, you don't really get a glimpse of it until you're really in it. Even as a recruit, you start to understand something, but you're not full-fledged mob guy yet. You're not a made guy. So you don't really get the full treatment, I would say, or the full understanding until you take that oath. And now, boom, now it's all reality to you. So, and I have to say this, Mike, I didn't walk away from the life because I was mad at anybody. I didn't walk away from the life because, oh, it's a bad lifestyle and I made a terrible mistake, even though in my heart I knew that there was a lot of things that I was doing wrong that I did anyway. I have to admit to that. I took an oath and I did things even when I knew they were wrong. So it wasn't a matter that I hated people. I want to get even with anybody. It wasn't any of that. I just realized that it's a bad lifestyle because I don't know any family of any member of the life that hasn't been totally destroyed in many different ways, including my own father, mother, brothers, and sisters devastated. And that's true of so many of the guys that I knew. Their families are destroyed and people get destroyed. And any lifestyle that does that to people is a bad life. And I came to that conclusion and I wanted to preserve my wife and my family. And that's the main reason why I walked away. But you have a different perspective. A lot of people see things from the media, they watch movies. I really want to know your feeling on that life, having a real insight into it, having dealt with the guys, having turned people into informants, having worked with cooperators, having listened to all the surveillance reports and really did the investigation. What's your overall impression of the life, the people? I want to generalize it at first.
It's, again, my father and uncles, cousins, Italian on one side. My mother's from Ireland. But Sunday dinners, which is a ritual, I constantly heard in the book I cite about the mob, about corrupt politicians, about corrupt priests in church. And vitamins was the other topic my father brought up. But I had no interest in it, at that time. But you could not avoid it. I mean, the names that I heard regularly was, Richie the Boot, Jerry Katina, Longies Willman. These are historic figures, Meyer Lansky. But it was the type of thing where, when I look back on it, Italians came to the country after the Irish. And the late 1800s, early 1900s, like any ethnic group, you move to a neighborhood where you have friends from your home country. You can't borrow money from the bank, so you borrow from somebody that has money in the neighborhood. As that evolves, you get the greed. You get where it may have originated in a more friendly way to just assist with the process of developing businesses. But after decades, I think it sort of evolved into something that could be just abuse of good people in the neighborhood.
My friends, you've probably heard me talk about politics a lot more lately because the truth is that conversation has never been more essential than it is right now. Everyone seems to have a different view, different ways of interpreting different events. So that's exactly why I partnered with Ground News. Ground News gives you the full picture. You're not just getting one side of the story, you're seeing how different outlets will frame it, you're seeing who owns those publications, and thanks to their blind spot feature, what stories might be kept from you altogether. Let me show you something that's really interesting, I think. On Ground News, you'll see how this story about my governor, Gavin Newsom, vowing to reject an immigration bill is being covered across the entire spectrum. But here's what's fascinating. Check out how the coverage splits. Widely conservative articles, they're highlighting that Newsom is looking to veto the bill, blocking state prisons from working with ICE. While shockingly, and I do mean shockingly, hardly any media coverage from the left. It's almost as if they don't want to cover it. They don't want you to hear it. Listen, I've been a resident in California for over 25 years. I hear all kinds of stuff around here. Ground News has become the perfect courier of valuable information that you won't see in legacy media. So here's what you need to do. Head to ground.news/MF right now, and you'll get 40% off when you subscribe to their Vantage plan. Trust me on this. In a world where everyone's running their own game and people I know about running a game, knowing what's really on the table, that's not just perception, it's protection. So once again, I'm giving an offer you can't refuse. Go to groundnews.com.
So when I got assigned to work organized crime, it's getting familiar with all the players, what they're involved in, who the unknowns are that are meeting with the people you're focused on. What type of businesses are they attached to? And once you start recording or listening to recordings and seeing, how they're backstabbing each other and all that hypocrisy is there. It's not everybody that can cooperate, whether it's an informant or a cooperating witness. But there is a trust when you're genuine with them. And I think I've come across where I'm going to do what I say I'm going to do. And I understand your empathy. And I can understand, I always said this about like somebody that doesn't want to cooperate because either their father or they themselves were abused by, say, law enforcement when they were young based on their ethnicity. And I have total empathy for that and understanding that you would not want to cooperate based on this history that you've experienced. At the same time, others realize they don't want this for their kids. They want them to stay away from the life, that the life is treacherous and it's hypocritical. Your crime family is supposed to come before your blood family. It's really a bizarre thought when you think about that. And I cite some of the details and experiences in the life and recordings. The whole thing about whacking somebody that was like your best man, and you're gonna kill him because the family wants you to kill him all over a title. That type of thing just doesn't resonate with me. And so expressing that to people when you're talking about the life, the people who really understand it and are a stronger personality, I think, can cooperate, either on a level of an informant or a cooperating witness. And you want something better for your family. You want to leave it.
Mike, what do you think the main reason have you found that people do cooperate? Is it because, from a lot of perspectives as well, these guys got in trouble, they don't want to go to jail, so they cooperate. Others say because the mob didn't treat them properly. They took an oath and they said, we're supposed to be stand-up, respectful guys, but I wasn't treated that way. So it's kind of a revenge thing. What did you find is the most, apparent reason that people cooperated?
I think it could be a combination, but the most authentic witnesses, like when you think of Phil Leonetti,
Yeah.
and that his cooperation details, where he had a cousin, Nicky Scarfa's son, he didn't want to be in the life. And the father would abuse him in front of all the gangsters instead of accepting the son wants to, doesn't want to be involved. Yeah, that type of thing, I think, was instrumental with Phil realizing this isn't for me, at the time that he got jammed up. And then the simplicity of it is when you do cooperate fully, it's just telling the truth. What are your experiences? It's really the quality of the investigators to ask and have knowledge of all the details and to present the questions to get a thorough understanding of their criminal life and what occurred and how it evolved. Because you never want to put a liar on the stand. I would never want to put somebody in the stand to lie for his own self-serving purpose to convict somebody. That's not what I'm about. In my cases and investigations, arrested numerous law enforcement, retired and active, an ATF, corrupt lawyer, corrupt judge, and a corrupt FBI agent. It's the facts. What's the evidence? And if you're committing a crime, all I need you to do is to tell me the truth. Don't try to lie to me, because I'm not going to put a liar in the stand, even if I find out you lied 2 years after the cooperation. So that process, I think, comes across credibly to the person you're pitching. And you're trying to see if he'll cooperate. And on some level, I can understand guys that hated law enforcement because of maybe how their families were abused in the past. At the same time, what's in it for your children? Are you raising a family with the expectation that you don't want them involved in the life? And the example you demonstrate to them can be significant. So, it's a process. Everybody's different. I've had informants that, I do cite things in the book because it's very awkward initially for them to get a sense of, are you doing exactly what you said you were going to do? And, and sometimes you've had disappointments where an informant got arrested for breaking the law. And, you know, it's a trust. And so I enjoyed the life. I find it to be a divine intervention, because it really makes a difference when you take some evil people off the street. And there are some very evil people out there involved in the life, and not just the Italian organized crime, but all different levels of organized crime.
Well, I have to tell you, I have to refer to something. I grew up with my father, and of course, you know who he is. And he always said to me, Michael, you can never be a cop. You can never be in law enforcement. And I said, why, Dad? He said, because they take an oath to lock up their own mother and father. And how could anybody do that? And later on in life, I had a discussion with him and I said, Dad, because that really impacted me. How could I ever do that to my mom and dad? I would never do that. So in my eyes, he made law enforcement bad people. And I grew up from the time I was a kid thinking that way. And I hated law enforcement as a result of that. And I always thought they were, my dad was so high profile that they were always harassing him, whatever. And then years later, I had a discussion with my dad. And I said, Dad, you know what? Before I got made, when I was a recruit and I sat down with Tom DeBella, who was the acting boss at the time, he said to me, from now on, we're number one in your life before anything and everything. And that means if you're at your mother's bedside when she's dying and we call you to service, you leave your mother and you come to us. I said, what made us any different than law enforcement? And he got a little pushback on me. He was, well, what do you mean by that? I said, well, how could I leave my mother if she's dying because the family wants me to come and whack somebody? And, he couldn't answer it. But it took me a while to start to realize that. So, sometimes you're so indoctrinated into the life and what you think is the good part of it, it takes you a while to realize, hey, this is not right. This is off. Something's wrong there. But I got to ask you this: was it easy, in your view, to flip somebody? Was it a lot of work involved? Did people come to you willingly? Did you pick out somebody and say, hey, this is a guy we think we can flip? I mean, how was that process for you?
In some instances, I don't attach it myself to whether he wants to cooperate or doesn't want to cooperate. I factually tell him what I'm doing and how he sort of entered into my investigation. So initially, when they don't know who you are, it's like, am I just blowing smoke as opposed to doing exactly what they say? But after a while, some of the biggest compliments I get are from the street, because I think they visualize having the name Campi as a Italian with a full head of hair, olive skin, like a John Gotti. And I remember one guy looking like, you're Campi? And it was a transaction I cite in the book where we provided money, backstop money that we knew they were money laundering, putting it offshore in a Bahama bank account. And we backstopped the check from the FBI. I had to get, it's in the book, I had to get the funding from the FBI to give it to this guy. And partly because we suspected he would not only identify where the millions were, but he'd cooperate. But his look of confusion when he heard my name, because just a few days before the arrest, Tommy Cafaro, Fish's son, had visited Barney Belomo in prison and told him about the check. And Tommy came back and said, Barney said, give it back. Campi will find it. Now, I convicted Barney in a plea of the case that I did with Jimmy Ida, but it was comical to hear them say, give it back, when we had provided it to him for the purpose of securing the evidence of this particular accountant who was laundering their money offshore bank accounts. But I mean, I could understand people like Nicky DeBlonde, who was a historic, guy in the life from the Genovese in that neighborhood over on First Avenue by D. Roberti's, not wanting to cooperate because of maybe some historic conduct that occurred by law enforcement, being raised in a house where they were under the impression that, say, PD hated them because of the language they spoke, the neighborhood they grew up with, the inference that they. So I didn't personalize things. To me, it's just, it's seeing, you can sort of sense when I'm talking to somebody, the weakness, the anger, the hatred for me, maybe, But at the same time, I can see the potential for cooperation. Like when the case comes down, it's much better to cooperate before I arrest you, because the arresting somebody without anybody knowing is walking between the raindrops, trying to get things done so that you can efficiently use the guy in a cooperative manner. But they also provide evidence that can be documented from their role in crime. So, I didn't personalize anything. I did. There was somebody that was extremely evil. I was never able to address. You may know him, Red Hot Gentile. He was over by Dear Birdies. I knew Nicky proposed him for induction, but I also knew Handsome Jack offered to induct him, knowing that the books were closed or something. And I knew that pissed Nicky off. And he shook my head when I talked with him about, what do you think about the loyalty? The guy, Red Hot. And he shook his head like he agreed with me. And he knew I had the information specific, that he didn't care who made him. That was the statement he made. I don't care which family makes me, which I thought, what kind of loyalty is that?
Yeah.
But at the same time, Nicky was, loyal to the Genovese family, and Chin loved him, and Fat Tony. Yeah, I think it was that connection to boxing and some history there. But there's definitely a difference between some of the guys in the life. And when you think about, your population of friends, normal person, if you got 5 or 6 good friends, that you can really rely on in situations that are difficult for a family, that's one thing. Joining an organization that has hundreds of people that are taking an oath to kill anybody that they're directed to kill, that come when they're summoned, when their mother's on deathbed. I mean, the logic of that being a real situation is just not credible. And that's the type of conversation where I think the brighter guys realize it. And at some point, the decision is, where are they in their stage of life? Are they in their 70s, 80s, or in their 50s? Do they want to change this? Do they want to influence their children to, not be involved in that life? And so that's the type of thing where I focus on. I put myself in their position when I'm listening to me speak to them. Like, what would I do in that position?
Yeah, and Mike, I think what happens with many of us, we come into the life with a very idealistic view of the life. Hey, you know what? We're taking an oath. This is a brotherhood. There's going to be honor, respect. We're going to have each other's back. And then when you come in, obviously, you see, like anything else in life, there's corruption. The corruption is probably more extreme because you're on the street and there's severe consequences. Like in normal life, you don't have as severe consequences when there's corruption. But, my father, who would in a million years never cooperate, and I'll explain that why, he said to me, on the side, he would say to me, son, this life is all full of shit, right? He would tell me that. And I'd say, I know. He said, but he would never cooperate because my he wanted his legacy to be that he would die with his boots on. And again, one day after he was violated and my mother passed away, I sat with him in the visiting room and I said, Dad, you have this idea. Our life is destroyed. Your family is destroyed. My mother, 33 years without a husband, at the end of her life, her relationship with my dad was just ugly. My brother, a drug addict for 25 years, ends up cooperating against my father. My sister dies of an overdose of drugs, and my younger sister dies at the age of 40. She was never mentally stable. I said, your allegiance to this oath destroyed our whole family, and you don't take responsibility for it. So and I think some of us realize it later on, but my dad, I hate to do this because I love my dad. As I sit here, I love him. But there was some kind of narcissism to that just overpowered everything else in his life. It wasn't so much his allegiance to the family and to the oath. It was more of his own narcissism, I believe, that would never allow him to be known as a cooperator. And I don't know. I mean,
that's the thing is egos. Yeah. And you have that you have it in politicians across the board.
Did you see a lot of egos in that life and the people that you've spoke to?
Yeah. I mean, egos, politicians, I've worked with law enforcement. There's this, my focus is what's the evidence? How do I get there? I'd had the book sites, I've had obstacles with supervisors that really didn't understand the life. And my thought is, he's got to sign off on my paperwork. And he's more concerned with if he agrees and something happens to the cooperator, that he gets hurt or something, he's going to have to answer to it. And a lot of them did not understand the life, let alone be able to feel comfortable about explaining what we did. And I cited in the book, I had a source who was summoned. They suspected that he was cooperating. They told me to tell him, don't go. Well, what happens to you if you don't go when you're summoned by a capo in a family? It doesn't end well. And so I went. I told him, they told me to tell you don't go, but I know you're going to go. And I remember he saw me sitting in the parking lot, because I was anticipating if they were going to do something, I was going to try to prevent it. It's, so there are people that have egos. You see it today in politics. It's just, I worked in the corporate world. Your egos can get the better of you. Rather than, brainstorming with your group on what's the best strategy, what are the solutions, everything has risks. I think my sources appreciated, my having their back or doing what I said I was going to do. And my expectation that they did the same. And I would not, the one thing I would tell, I had that source Durso, who's in the book. He said the best advice I'd ever told him was don't ever lie to me. Because if I catch you in a lie, because you don't know who's going to cooperate after the fact, I'm not going to put a liar in the stand. Because I don't trust. Then how do I determine what's factual and what's not factual? So
Let me ask you this, Mike. With all the investigative tools that you have, that the FBI has and government has at their disposal, would you say that the most important investigative tool is a cooperator?
yeah, it can be. I mean, in some instances, you could put a device somewhere where you capture the recording, but having a cooperator, being able to be there where you can dictate the conversations is invaluable. But your whole process of them fully addressing issues is important. So you have to have some knowledge of that life, the individual that you're working, and the topics that you're trying to address from an evidentiary. Because prosecutors are prosecutors for a little window of time. Law enforcement typically are career.
Well, the reason I asked that too is I'll tell you an experience. I had been on trial with Giuliani and I beat that case. A couple of months later, the Eastern District indicted me on that racketeering case. I'm in custody. I had to be taken down to Florida. I had negotiated my plea deal. I had to go down to Florida because I had a RICO case down there too, and I had to take that plea. So I was accompanied by a number of FBI agents, postal inspector, everybody that was investigating me at the time. And some of the guys were asking me, Michael, now that it's over, when we investigated you at such and such a place, will we write about this? And we were talking, just having a good conversation. And one guy asked me, why did you take the plea? And it was an FBI agent. I got along with him, forget his name right now. And I was teasing him. I said, I just beat you on a big case. I figured I'd give you one win. I said, I'd probably beat you again. And he turned to me and he said, Michael, not this time. He said, you became a big star and they were lining up to cooperate against you. And he put that thought in my head. And I always wondered, I said, how many guys were I talking to on the street that were actually cooperating, like a Greg Scarpa, that I didn't know about it? And I sat with Greg for 10 years.
Yeah.
I didn't know cooperating. So I'm wondering, how many guys, are there really a lot of guys out there that are informants, maybe not, testifying against people, but informants and really giving information?
I did not find it difficult to develop informants and cooperators because, especially in the criminal life, it's having knowledge of how things evolve. Perfect example. If I talk about like Dave Stone, which is in the book as one of my favorite supervisors, he was removed as my supervisor. You never hear in the commission trial, you always hear Southern District. But if you look at, Dave was the case agent that convicted Rastelli and Joe Massino in the Eastern District, and they severed him from the Southern because of the Joe Pistone undercover. Because that whole aspect of having to argue that they were part of the family when we were making the recordings, but since Pistone came out, they severed it. So, but you never hear anything about Dave Stone from the conviction of the Rastelli boss, I mean, the Bonanno boss, and the future boss, but Massino. So when I look at things, I think having a conversation with somebody to get them to, a lot of guys, it depends on their age. It depends on how bitter they are, about maybe their prior experience in law enforcement. But the reality is, what do you want for your future? Like if I'm charging a guy with a murder, I'd rather go to prison, go to trial than give him like a light sentence. Like Jimmy Ida went to trial. He got convicted doing life in prison as a consigliere. There's a lot of historic details that each guy is involved in over decades. And so they're aware specifically. I just think it takes legwork to find out your subjects, the core group of people, because every day there's a conversation of some type of crime. It's just natural. There is a lot of humor. I mean, there's a lot of guys that have a good sense of humor, but the meetings typically they're not always violent, but they're definitely involving some opportunity to make money that's not going to be disclosed. And it depends on how bright they are, on how successful they are. I mean, gambling operations, the only time I think we'd rate him is when there was something else going on. And it was, when Gussie Faraci, the DA agent, was killed.
Yeah.
I mean, everything was happening because everybody in law enforcement wanted to catch, Gus. And his cousin ended up cooperating, after Gus got killed. And I remember Al DiArco describing, they knew who was hiding Gus. And Al described going there at like midnight, handing the kid a gun and saying, kill him or kill yourself. We know you're hiding Gus. And that's where you give him up. And it's just counterproductive. The life has so many different, walking between the raindrops, I call it, because there's so many different things going on. And the more you're in it, the more sometimes somebody's ego, he hates you because somebody could hate you because your father was a significant player in the family. And they feel like, well, why do they treat you better than they treat me? So there's a lot of egos in that life too that can be compromised in the capacity of having somebody, if you know about it and you know the details, they may become an informant. They may become a cooperating witness. I enjoyed it. I tell you in the book, my favorite movies is It's a Wonderful Life, the impact everybody has on each other in this world. And taking somebody treacherous off the street would make me feel good because I wouldn't know whose life I was helping, but I know by removing them, somebody else is going to live a better life.
Hey, my friends, a lot of you already know that just a few short months ago, I started my private community. We call it the Franzese family. And I got to be honest, I'm really blessed to see that over 500 people have already become a part of it. You know what they're doing? They're connecting with one another, they're learning, and they're growing together basically every single day. And I'm going to be honest again, it's getting pretty hard for me and my team to give quality time to everyone. So here's what we're going to do. Starting March, we'll be making the community for invite only. Now, you still have time to sign up this month and lock in the price of just $10 a month, 2 cups of coffee. But after that, honestly, it's going to be only for select people who we feel can really benefit from what we have to offer and really who others in the family can benefit from. That's where family is all about. So, don't wait. Take part in growing yourself in the Franzese family, lock in the price right now, and don't miss both the benefits and the success that come from a real community environment. Go to michaelfranzese.com/family or click the link in the description below to sign up. And I hope to see you all there because you're going to see a lot of me. I do a lot in that community. It's going to be a legacy piece for me. I just love helping people. So that's an offer you shouldn't refuse, people. See you in there.
Well, Mike, let me ask you this, because one of the, I would say the knocks that you get on government that work with informants is that sometimes they give the informant too much. you know, whether it's murder or whatever crime they convicted, they committed rather. The FBI, the government gives them too much leeway in order to convict somebody else. They give away the store, so to speak, to some bad people just because they cooperated. What's your feeling on that? Did you experience that, or what's, you know, how do you?
Well, I will tell you,
treat
so there were some of the cooperating witnesses I didn't care for. Like, I remember debriefing, somebody. Oh, I'll tell you, Sammy the Bull. I remember asking him a question. Do you know Sally Dogs Lombardi? I mean, he grew up in Bensonhurst. I could have asked an 8-year-old kid in Bensonhurst, how does Sally make money? I didn't, as soon as his response, it pretty much ended. I did the interview with Dave Stone, and it was in like the Joe Valachi, prison we joked about. And it was we cut the interview off like right there because I was thinking, I don't know, I'm not going to just asked a few questions. I thought, all right, we're done. We went golfing. We left there. We had nothing to do. There was a golf course right there. But I remember thinking, I can understand. So Al DiArco cooperated before Sammy, which I think was somewhat instrumental in Sammy realizing you're not beating that case. Philly and Eddie cooperate. You got the tapes from John Gotti. So I can see the fact that Sammy being known and assisting in the conviction of Gotti at trial would help. But from the standpoint of others cooperating, yeah, that helped. But Al DiArco was a significant acting boss of the Lucchese family. You had gas pipe in them trying to kill everybody in the family. So there was a lot of cooperation going on there. I interviewed Al DiArco. I found him extremely genuine, phenomenal witness. Phil Leonetti, similar. Carmine Sessa, there was a lot. Frankie Gioia. I mean, there was a lot of reasons that these people, again, it's how thorough you are as an agent. What questions are you going to ask so that they provide you information? Because if you don't ask the question, you may not get the answer because sometimes they don't want to give it up just voluntarily. Al was super, though, Al DiArco. I found him to be, excellent. Now, Mike Durso, he was proposed. They were talking about inducting him in secrecy, without Farby, the acting boss, knowing who had cancer. And we made numerous recordings about, they did it discreetly. I made a recording where they said Joe Dente Jr., Joe Dente's son.
Yeah.
He was inducted without anybody knowing. His name was not passed to the other families. I remember when we arrested him, I told him to his face, in that life, that's supposed to be a death sentence. You're supposed to pass the name around. And Peter Gotti, when he had a discussion, Peter Gotti, I think, with Dente, he said, when did he get made? I never saw that name, which was another part of the recording we had made. It's just, there's a lot there. And it's like in the corporate world, who you know, who's your rabbi there? Who's the one that's protecting you? But it can change. It can change the treachery.
It's fascinating to me sitting here and listening to a former FBI agent that knows as much about the life that I do. I mean,
Yeah.
what does that tell you? He tells you.
Well, I did have, in the book I talk about, like my father, when he'd raise us, he in the book, he would say to me, what's a secret? And as soon as I would say a secret is when you and he'd cut me off. He said, as soon as somebody else knows it, it's no longer a secret. And
So your father and my father had a lot in common. My dad would say to me, Mike, if you and I did something together that we don't want anybody to know about it, he said 5 seconds later, if you ask me about it, I'll say, what are you talking about? There's never any reason to talk about anything again. He drummed that into my head, which was helpful to me throughout my time on the street. But all of these people that you mentioned, I knew, I came across, during my time in that life. But I want to ask you about somebody specifically because fascinating character, and you cover him a lot in the book, and that's the Chin Gigante. I met Chin actually twice. He sent for me, and Freddie Giovanelli, maybe Fritzy.
Fritzy,
He brought to meet Chin. And I walked with him twice down Austin Street, and we had good conversations. One of the reasons that he sent for me, he had heard I was having some trouble with Junior, or he thought I was, because I was making a lot of money in the gas business. There must have been some talk on the street. And he said to me, anytime you want, if you want to leave the Columbus, you come here and you be a captain with me. And I was like, that came out of nowhere. I was kind of stunned with that. But I mean, I got along with him the 2 times I met him. But something that very interesting in the book that you said,
Yeah.
when he confessed to the fact that his whole act for those 30 years was just an act, that he actually confessed to it. Did that really happen?
Oh, yeah, because I had recordings after 9/11. We made numerous recordings with Durso about Chin's role in the family, still running things from prison. And it was all over George Barone, who was a historic old time member of the Genovese family who was originally with Vito Genovese. And so Durso was supposed to kill George Barone. Now, if you can envision this, uh, Barone was somebody that significantly assisted the Genovese family in making tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars with the ports, with the ILA, because he was there when they were transitioning from loading ships manually to loading ships with the containerization process. And I'm sure you understand, historically, the ILA, the Gambino family controlled, for the most part, Brooklyn and Staten Island, while Manhattan and Jersey was controlled by the Genovese. And when you look at the land in Jersey, where all the containers are, Staten Island and Brooklyn didn't have the land for the containers, while New Jersey had all that land right along the waterway and by the airport. And as a result, George created a new local for the repairs of the containerization, which facilitated them controlling the ILA like 90%. So now when you look at things, George went to prison probably back in the 70s. I think he did like 10 years, 12 years. Maybe it was a 14-year sentence. He comes out, he's owed 60 grand by a guy named Umberto Guida on a prior business type of restaurant, I think, type of deal that went belly up. Umberto Guido was the person that George facilitated to do the repair business. He's a multi-millionaire. Before going to prison, and Chin is not the boss at this time. Chin, I think it was Benny Squin. Lombardo was the boss. But Chin asked George if he would facilitate a relationship for Andrew with Burt Guido. So he did, because he liked Chin. They were tight. Because again, George was originally with Vito before he was released to Fat Tony. That said, think about this. He comes out of prison. He's helping them facilitate ILA with Cubans down in Florida. They want him to get Burt Guido part of the job. He wants his money, 60 grand from Burt that he's legitimately owed. They find it would be insulting to Andrew. Now, again, Andrew's not a made guy. But with Chin, blood family came first. I found out that Chin got pissed off that they didn't just give George the money. But because of them viewing it as insulting to Chin, who had no idea that they should have just given him the 60 grand, he provided so many different people jobs, $400,000 a year, $300,000 a year without having to leave their house. And yet, and the recordings included Patty Falsetti, Tommy Cafaro. I would have given it out of my own pocket to him. Instead, they were coordinating George's murder, using Durso to kill him. So at that point, George cooperated, but I knew from the recordings with all at Chin, I said, let's go see what Chin's doing after 9/11. And he's on the phone talking to the family like I'm talking to you now. And he was the one that called them to say, is everybody okay? Because he's in prison in Texas and he wants to see what the airplane's down, if, the World Trade Center. And the family didn't even know that the planes hit the World Trade Center. So it was clear that he was faking it. And
Right.
so many members of the family could have won as well. So Chin did the right thing by just taking a plea. Andrew took a plea. But when you look back on that hypocrisy of that life and the cause that it did, I felt bad for Rita, his daughter, and family members, because you're walking around crazy. Now, the thing that I connected the dot, there was a historic bond between the Colombo family and the Genovese family, going back to the days of Crazy Joe Gallo. If you look at Kid Blast being released to Chin's crew and Punchy Aliano, that history, and I go through it more in the book, is understandable about why Chin would ask you, if you don't feel comfortable there, come here. Because, a lot of crazy things were going on in the Colombo Persico family. So, and he, to me, had respect for your father and you, and that offer would have been consistent with probably crazy with Punchy and Kid Blast.
Yeah.
So there's a lot there.
When I told my father about that, my dad was away, of course. He said, "Well, why didn't you go? Don't you realize Chin is the powerhouse?" And I said, "Dad, I know that, but I don't jump ship." And he said, "Okay." But I have to tell you something about, I had an associate of mine that was an executive at Japan Lines in Jersey. And I had a scam going with him where he would assign the repairs to the containers to me. I had a company and just give me an invoice and pay me. We never did a repair on any container. And that lasted for about 2 years. We made hundreds of thousands of dollars and nobody ever found out. He got fired at one point, but they just let him go. That was the end of that. But yeah, so
There's a lot of funny stories. There's a lot of funny. I mean, I remember when I was first labor racketeering there in the squad, and I went out to a guy. His name is on like multiple contractors because he's a ghost employee for the shakedown by Cervone. And, when you go out, like, act like you're a turnip, like you don't understand. Can you tell me, do you work for this guy? Yes, I work for this. And they go through that process where you want to see how credible they are and how shaky they are. But you had to say, I really got a kick out of when I had told them, so what's your workday like? Your shift is like, 8 to 4 or something like that. Is it always the same? Do you work any other shifts? No, that's it. That's it. He'd be on 4 payrolls. Can you be at 4 different job sites at the same time? It was just, then they look confused because it was just Basil using the same name, and his son cooperated against him. Bobby Cervone, which, and I remember when he cooperated, it was sad because when you listen, his cooperation, he didn't meet his brother Joe Cervone till they were in their 30s. And at Bobby Cervone's wedding, his father took all the wedding gift money. I really felt bad for him when you debrief him on the cooperation, why he's cooperating. I mean, it really, was bizarre to me, that whole, process. And I remember, you can see how emotional he was over that the mistreatment, between him and the father. And apparently the father, my understanding is Bobby Cervone, Basil Cervone, was suspected of killing his brother, who was also in the Union, at his beach house, shooting him in the head through the screen. So, I mean, I look at it and I just think it's crazy. It's crazy life, though. When you point it out to somebody that's brighter, I think it's the brighter guys that can process it and say, you know what, I'm done. Whether they want to be an informant or a cooperator.
Well, especially listening after, listening to you and hearing how much information you have, there's really no secrets about that life anymore. None. Everything's been revealed. I mean, everything, the inner workings.
Yeah, a lot of it's ego. And, it's hard for me, you have that in corporate world, you have it in law enforcement. Some people, it's a flaw. It's a human characteristic flaw. And you're seeing it in Washington now. I mean, it's crazy times. Why would people dislike what's happening if you have cost savings, to taxpayers? It's all like the Boston Red Sox against the Yankees. Doesn't make sense as far as a patriotic, unified purpose, which,
Let me ask you this because, you bring this up current times. I mean, it apparently now, polling about the FBI is that people are very disappointed and discouraging the agency. And I see that. I mean, I think, look, during this past administration, I think the Department of Justice used the FBI to do certain things that they shouldn't have done, with social media and things like that. What is your feeling about the current status of the FBI?
Yeah, I think they need to have some corrective measures taken place. And I would love to participate in pointing out how to do a review of your managers because historically, if they do not have the experience as a street agent, because the best job is the street. And if you really don't have experience as a street agent, you shouldn't be overseeing street agents because you have no experience. It's like talking a different language. And I think that's a big flaw that costs the government money because what can take few weeks to do an investigation versus a few years, you're spinning your wheels as opposed to doing things efficiently and explaining to agents when you're training newer agents how to go about being efficient in conducting, whether it's fraud, because I did white collar as well as, organized crime. And again, the organized crime depends on your group. There's so many different groups. There's Albanians, there's Russians, there's just a variety. And the focus should be on who are the most treacherous from a murderer standpoint. Is the Italian organized crime on the same level it was historically? I think they've wisened up not to do the murders, but there's still about 100 locals that they have influence in. And I compare it to like New York Giants. If the Giants lose the center, they don't play 10 men against 11. They just replace him with somebody who may not be as good. So you sort of have to have an understanding of the game, of where you're focused and how to do these investigations efficiently. And a lot of guys see a supervisor who's not particularly bright. They could be a new agent saying, I could have made a better decision in that. And yet they're brown nosers. They're ass kissers. And the supervisor puts them in for a desk. And I'm thinking, why do you want a desk if you don't have the experience? It's inefficiency. And there's a way to improve it. They're guys, the street to me is the best part of the FBI, law enforcement, but it's doing it efficiently and honestly. If you're in law enforcement and you're a crook, I think you should get maximum sentence. And depending on how bad the crime is, I think it should be mandatory life in prison because you don't cross that street to me as a corrupt law enforcement. That to me is more problematic than a guy that grows up and is just a criminal all his life.
Wow.
Bothers me.
Let me, and I respect that, Mike. I really do it. And let me ask you this. During my time in that life, we had all 5 families. I think we had about 750 guys. The Genovese and the Gambino families were bigger than the other 3. We had, I think, Colombo's, we had about 115 guys, and Lucchese and Bananas are around the same number. But we had at that time, according to what I was told, there were about 1,200 FBI agents assigned to all 5 families. And today, from what I heard, and I can't verify this, maybe there's less than 100 agents assigned to the families right now. Is that because, first of all, is that true to your knowledge?
I don't think that's accurate because I was on one of the bigger squads when I got there in '85, and we just transitioned to a joint organized crime squad. I think we had 15 agents and maybe 12 detectives. Mm-hmm. And so you had the Gambino squad in Brooklyn, Queens, Lucchese squad. Gambino squad was not a joint task force. Lucchese squad was. So I think we may have had on a squad say 30. I'd say in New York, you probably have about 150 guys working, and of that 150, some are more, they're sitting on a wire or they're waiting for a lead. They're not as effective and as efficient, like if I had a bug up and depending on the time frame of the bug, it'd be, you'd have 3 people depending on the shifts, and then you'd have surveillance. So a lot of times They're not doing their own investigation. They're just attached to an investigation. And that part of being efficient is something that I think can be greatly improved. And the other thing that I would love to do is there's so many guys in the FBI who are attorneys. And so your U.S. Attorney's Office, they're there for a window of time because they have other visions, from being lawyers. But a lot of the things that why not have agents if they want to practice law also do something from a civil standpoint and not just focused on organized crime, but I sort of think like your Bernie Madoff and your other people involved in these complex fraud schemes that are white collar crime, they should get hammered with, forfeiture. Civil forfeiture, you can get treble damages, triple the amount of what was lost or taken. And so I really think that would be a much more efficient way to address things from the government standpoint, because it's easy to take a plea and say, okay, you made 10 million, give me $1 million. And from just a street sense, the guy is sitting, depending on the wise guy, some guy may want to do more time to keep more money. But that whole plea thing is something that can be more efficiently addressed, I think. And it's just, it's experience. And why would you join law enforcement? My thought is I wanted to do something interesting. I almost joined the military, but I wanted to do something interesting. I studied accounting in school. I didn't really care for it at all. Why would you want be a supervisor when you don't have the experience? And why would you join law enforcement if you don't want to go out there and conduct investigations? It's like socialism. I get paid the same as you do, and you're working around the clock to 4 a.m. and I'm just sitting here coming in, having my coffee, read the newspaper, waiting for somebody to assign me a lead. There's a way to be much more efficient. And I really think expressing that to new guys so that they get the interest and say, you know what, I want to do that. Because some of the guys I mentored, I really appreciate how they enjoyed the investigations. And then I hope they pass it on to guys under them, because there is a lot to do. And we're not that efficient.
And I listen, it's like anything else. You're right. Efficiency is everything. I have two more questions. This is something that I get throwback on all the time. And what I tell people is, listen, during my time in that life, we were not allowed to deal with drugs. We were told straight out, you deal with drugs, you die. I know some people that got hooked up and got in trouble, severe trouble. So my question is this: in all your investigation, okay, how prominent did you see drug trade or drug business going on in our life?
Well, I will tell you a funny story. When we went from labor racketeering, initially we were focused on the Colombo family. I opened an investigation on Carmine Sessa, Bobby Zambardi. But 8 months later, we were the Genovese family. And that's when I had asked, should we focus on narcotics or do you want to focus on labor racketeering? And initially they said, well, narcotics. And that's when I focused on Sally Dogs Lombardi. And I caught this guy, Sal Romano, coming into the country with 2 keys of heroin. I mean, it's in the book. I bumped my head with bosses because you had narcotic squads that overlap with the OC squads. And it's like, why can't we work together? I remember identifying this guy, Booth, that had a source, traveling to Italy after Sal Romano got caught, obviously to bring in more heroin to the country for Sally Dogs. And bottom line was, Manhattan DA also had a case on Sally Dogs. So Sally eventually got arrested. And I had information of Chin hated the fact that he was involved in narcotics, and it was proven. And I remember having the information of a threat to Sally Dog's life. You knew him? You knew Sally Dogs? Yeah.
Yes.
So I went to Rikers to just give him the information of a threat to his life. It was a very comical moment for me because he didn't want to meet with anybody. And they just brought him into the room, and I just identified myself. I described, I had specific information that Chin would love to pay your bail, get you out of here, and kill you because he didn't want you involved. He didn't want to talk. He didn't want to hear. He just want to leave. And I just said, look, if you feel that earth move shake, because I'm thinking he could get shivved in prison, something could happen to him. If he ever wants to, reach out to law enforcement, my name's Campi, just ask for the Genovese squad. And as he was walking out giggling, he said, I thought he was dead, meaning Vito Genovese. I thought it was a comical moment, but he was a treacherous guy that just was reckless. And was thinking, how does Chin not know this when you look at the crew and how active they were from a narcotics standpoint?
But overall, with your informants, did you see, like I always said to people, look, we didn't even come close or compared to the cartels in Mexico or South America. We weren't heavy dealers like that. Were there some guys doing it? Of course, we're street guys and guys going to do it. But it wasn't a heavy business for us. And that's what I try to, and people say, no, Vito Genovese went to jail. I said, that was before our time. I'm telling you through my era. And I just want to know if you can verify that we weren't.
Yeah, no, my understanding is along the same lines, is like after the Appalachia meeting, because you had family members from the Italian organized crime that were getting hooked up and getting addicted to drugs. So they didn't want, just like prostitution, they didn't want any of that. And so, yeah, they were supposed to stay away from it. And think about the different opportunities to make in construction, in the labor unions, all these other opportunities. You didn't need the risk of the jail sentences attached to narcotics. But some guys just, didn't play by the rules. Right.
Yeah.
It's street. And it's.
Yeah, hey, listen, some guys would just, do whatever they could to make a living. If it was drugs or whatever, it didn't matter. Let me ask you this last question, and I could stay on with you for the next 4 hours of my boy. But a lot of people say that, John Gotti destroyed the life. He was so out there. He snubbed his nose in the face of the law enforcement. As a result, he destroyed the life. And I've said this many times. I said, look, John may not have been that great for the life at times. He brought a lot of attention. People were upset and they went after a lot of people. Yes. But in my view, it was really the RICO statute that was the tool that the government used to really put the hurt on my former life. What's your feeling on that?
No, I agree. And when you look at specifics, I mean, when Blakey wrote that statute, that was first used. Everybody thinks the commission. It was used in New Orleans first in the 70s. It was used in Arkansas. It was used. I'm trying to think of another place, but if you look at the life, it was a great tool because of the ongoing criminal conduct that continues and the window of time of utilizing it, showing a pattern, showing an enterprise. But it should be used more frequently against all groups, especially, people that are committing huge financial crimes as ongoing for years. And it's an efficient tool to expose and correct that behavior. It was, again, when you think about the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s going through, I cite in the book a lot of the hypocrisy, with the treachery, about who killing who in the families and who's doing what. But like a Meyer Lansky, a street smart guy can say, we shouldn't be doing this. We should be involved in like vending machines. Think about the money that was made in vending machines, putting a cigarette machine into a diner or something like that and generating money. He sort of legitimized it. So yes, RICO was the statute that efficiently addressed organized crime, but that should also be used in other areas and can be. If you've got a group of guys working together in a corporate world and they're doing things, whether it's mortgage fraud or whatever it is. I mean, we had a check casher in Jersey City. We made recordings where they were banging tens of millions of dollars out in penny stock fraud. Well, those penny stock frauds weren't just the street guys doing it. And the check cashing guy. There were guys inside the Wall Street.
I have a question for all my friends and followers. Have you tried my wine yet? You know, in the last 2 years, we've made tremendous progress with Franzese wine, and it's really all thanks to your support, and obviously because people are finding out we have a great wine at a great price. In 2025, we aim to become a national brand, and I want all of you to be a part of it. Every bottle you buy, every story you share builds more than a brand. It fuels a movement. The story of our wine is one of people having second chances and of lives being transformed. That's the truth. So go to my website, franzesewine.com, and get your bottle today. Salud, my friends.
And Mike, I have to say this also. People ask me, why such a concentration on Mafia, Cosa Nostra? Why not these other criminal groups? Why do they come after you guys so hard? And my answer is this. I said, well, I think there's a couple of reasons. Number one, I think in New York, there's no question we were the most powerful, and maybe across the country in major cities, we were the most powerful organized crime group. More than the Russian, more than anything else, more than the Chinese. They all had their own groups. I said, that's number one. Number two, we were the most high profile. The John Gottis of the world and the Joe Colombos and people like that. We were out there and people noticed us and we were committing those crimes. And number three is, I said, listen, we never fought back. We were told straight out, there's no violence against, law enforcement. We don't do that. You get arrested, you put your hands out, get the handcuffs on, and you fight them in court. So I think all three of those things kind of led to the FBI, the Justice Department saying, hey, we got to get rid of these guys. They have too much power, too much control, and we got to get rid of them. Was that kind of the mentality inside the FBI?
Well, I mean, when I look at things and try to visualize how it evolved, I mean, George Barone talked about Joe Kennedy and Joe Kennedy's relationship, and that type of thing where Robert Kennedy became the AG and John F. Kennedy got killed. I mean, that whole evolution, I think, probably was the foundation of saying, okay, how do we address this? And that probably facilitated Blakey creating a scenario because there was an understanding. I mean, Al Capone came from Brooklyn originally.
Yeah.
I mean, that whole concept of, and the recordings knowing the relationships between players and the businesses they're involved in, it sort of was an eye-opener probably for law enforcement. And I really think when they first started, they didn't understand, the broad extent and connection. Like, when I look at Jack Garcia, that's somebody you may want to, or did you ever I mean, he made so many different undercover conversations. And I laugh because he's Cuban and they were proposing him to be made in the Gambino family. And it was like explaining, the culture. It's sort of comical. But now, it's hard. How would you groom somebody? Why would somebody cooperate? Why would you think there's a loyalty there when with computers they can find out how many cooperators from the various organized crime families are there? And it's just, so it is changing. I mean, I do think, the Genovese family has a population now up in the Bronx. That's where the power is. But if you're not focused on what they're doing, I think it's good they stepped away from the murders because, and there's not the same focus, but there is a generating money process. And the way you correct it, like you would in white collar, is to seize the assets made illegitimately and then some, because why would you get involved if you're going to lose everything, whether it's in 5 years or 10 years? And that's, I think, the way to discourage it. The murders from the gangs, law enforcement has a lot of guys, prior military, firearms is a big thing. So it's not like your real street agents don't fear arresting the bad guys. They actually, enjoy it because you're removing somebody that, if you know enough about them, some of them are treacherous. Some are guys that just were raised in that life, When I say good guys, they're not treacherous. They understand the hypocrisy. They're not out to kill innocent people, but there are others that are just evil. And yeah, I mean, each family, organized crime family, has an element of bizarre guys. I mean,
Yeah.
when I think of some of the guys that, the treachery of some of these guys and just the cold blooded nature, uh, I, I enjoyed focusing on the ones that I thought were, you know, bad for the world. But again,
Well, Mike,
I would do whatever they assign me to. If they assign me to white collar, I work on that. Public corruption. So
well, I can say this, there were guys that I came across in that life that, just to put it very nicely, I prefer not to be around, it was, I say it nicely. But, look, I have said this, and I think you're a perfect example of this. The reason you guys were so successful against us is because you did your job better than we did ours. There was no reason, for a Joe Pistone to be undercover for 5 or 6 years in that family. We just didn't do our job. There's no reason for all these guys to get caught on tape. My dad he used to pick up a phone and he used to say to me, Mike, this is a cop. This is a cop. Don't talk on it. A lot of guys didn't realize that. And so we got laxed. We didn't keep up with the times. And of course, from within, a lot of us destroyed ourselves just from our own behavior, not being, stand-up people within ourselves. I mean, look, I saw a lot of guys suffer consequences that shouldn't have suffered consequences, no question, for whatever reasons, political reasons, who got envious, and there was just a lot of that in the life. And you did your job better, and like I said, you're a perfect example. Your book is excellent, Mafia Takedown. I could talk to you for another 4 hours. There's so many questions out there. So maybe we'll do this again. I'm going to read. I'm going to read the book thoroughly, and I'm sure when I see some of the things that you say in there, I'm going to say, how did these guys do this? How did it happen? Why did it happen? So hopefully,
there's so many stories that aren't included that because you just had to leave it at a certain. But yeah, no, I enjoyed the conversation, and I hope you enjoyed the book.
Absolutely. I've recommended it to a few people that they saw me talking about it and they asked me about it. And I said, I'm into it. I've read a couple of things very interesting. Read it. So I'm sure it's doing very well. But Mike, I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Mike. You have a good one. Take care.
People, I got to say, it's just amazing to me. I mean, I have to say this. They did their job better than we did our job. That's the bottom line. We could get mad at them. We can, be upset with them. We can call them names. They did their job. It was their job to come and prosecute us, to investigate us, to put us in prison if we were committing crimes. And between their surveillance techniques, between the RICO statute, between, the cooperatives and the informants and all of that, they know everything. There's really nothing hidden anymore. You can't blame any one particular person, that wouldn't be fair. You can't blame, John Gotti, like I hear all the time. It's not John Gotti. He didn't take down the mob. Look what he said about Chin. They got Chin to admit, whether, as part of his plea deal or what, admit that, he was faking being, having dementia for all of those years. Look, you just cannot stay in criminal conduct consistently over a period of time and think you're going to get away with it forever. It's just not happening. It's not happening in my former life. It's not happening in these gangbanger life. It's just not happening. The way to go, people, you got to go straight. You can't trust people on the street. When you're dealing with criminal activity, you don't know who's going to, turn. Or you just don't know. And I'm sure some of you are saying, well, Michael, you cooperated. Look, I'm not going to get into that again. You know my story on that. I've said it many times. But, you just can't do it anymore. They have too much, investigative prowess now. They got too many techniques. You just cannot do it. So my word to all of you young people that might be watching this, get off the street. Get a legitimate job. Go straight. It's the only way to go. So, Mike, I appreciate it. It was a very good guest, very informative. We may have him on again. I definitely recommend this book. I didn't read it all. I skimmed through it. I knew all the names in there. Very, very familiar. Like I said, it's amazing talking to somebody, from the other side that knows as much about the life, from people in the life, and from all the surveillance that I knew. It's unbelievable. Anyway, my friends, that's it for today. Hope you enjoyed it. How do I always leave you? Same way. Be safe. Be healthy, God bless each and every one of you, your families, your neighborhoods and communities. God bless America. Yes, I'll see you next time. Take care.